Welcome to Blueprint for Life, the podcast designed to encourage, uplift, and challenge you on your journey. In just a moment, we will be joined by our host, Elder Lawrence McCarter. We are thrilled you are willing to join us on this transformational ride. At Blueprint for Life, we believe each of us has a unique blueprint crafted by God Himself. This podcast will explore how to discover and unlock that blueprint, allowing you to live a life of purpose, fulfillment, and joy. Through insightful conversations, thought-provoking interviews, and biblical truths, we will delve into the keys that can unlock your potential. Together, we will navigate the challenges, setbacks, and triumphs that come our way, always relying on the timeless wisdom found in God's Word. Now, let's get started with this episode of Blueprint for Life. Here's Elder McCarter.
Welcome to another episode of Blueprint for Life. I am your host, Elder Lawrence McCarter, and this is another one for the books. I am so glad that you have deigned to join me once again, Blueprint Faithful. It is another one, man. It's great. You know, it's been another week. If anybody has been watching the news lately, I have no idea what to tell you. It is as if somebody is writing the news who is somewhere between enjoying a good laugh and somebody who thinks up the most absurd things that they could possibly think up and is just at this point amusing themselves. I don't know what to think of some of the absurdity that I've seen on the news as of late. I don't think I've ever been quite this ready for an election season to be over as I have for this one. And I've probably said that in previous election seasons. But this one, man, this one takes the cake. I don't know how to say it without coming off as if I'm picking on somebody or talking badly about somebody. If you can't say nothing nice about somebody, just don't say nothing. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to exercise my right to just move on, because at this point I'm having a really hard time coming up with anything nice to say about anybody. So I'm just, like I said, I'm going to move on and hope we get some relief from somewhere. Hopefully we can get some relief from somewhere. It's genuine relief, not like temporary, momentary, you know, like here's your last meal before the end kind of relief. No, like some genuine take a deep breath and it's gonna be okay kind of relief. All right, that's all I got to say about that. I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, and just in preparation and looking at, you know, what is it that really has been tugging at my heartstrings. And like many times when I sit and think, my time in the military comes back to mind. And, you know, seeing as I had to go to the VA recently, it always brings back to mind a lot of what veterans have to deal with and what a lot of military have to deal with. And it's one of those things that is never really far from my mind, especially since I'm a student of history. I like to look back over what we've gone through, because I do believe that history informs our future. You really can't get away from what has happened in the past if you want to understand more about where you're going. One of the first things I learned when I joined the military is, first of all, that freedom is not free. That's that's one of those that's one of those things that is really impressed upon you. We stand on the shoulders of the sacrifices of those who came before us. The cost is the highest price that can be paid. Real, true freedom will always cost nothing less than the life or lives of those that are willing to purchase the freedom that we enjoy. Has been purchased by those who were willing to shed blood. It's not like freedom is something that we're just given. Freedom is something that has been purchased throughout all time by blood. You can find that all the way back into Genesis. Freedom has been purchased by blood all the way back to the very beginning. In this country, between September 26th and November 11th in 1918, 26,277 Americans were killed in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Okay, 26,277 Americans killed between December 16, 1945 and January 25th, 1946 at the Battle of the Bulge. 19,276 Americans were killed. And between June 15th and July 9th, 1944, 2,949 Americans were killed at the Battle of Saipan. And on December 7th, 1941, at the attack on Pearl Harbor, 2,500 Americans were killed. And on D-Day, June 6th, 1944, 1,465 Americans were killed. So the cost of freedom is and has been high for us here in America and all around the world. The cost of freedom has been and remains high, incredibly high. If you look in the book of Romans, think about the 7th chapter, 14th and 15th verse, Paul said, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am made out of flesh, sold into sin's power. For I do not understand what I am doing, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate." Paul is saying very clearly, first of all, you have to know that the law is spiritual, but man is flesh. And we have been sold into sin's power. We're sold under sin. So that makes us incapable of pleasing God. Wholly incapable of pleasing God. So that is kind of our first strike. The first issue that we face. Though we have a perfect God, a God who desires to save us, a God who desires to bring us back to a perfect relationship with Him, the gulf that stands between us and Him is our very sin nature, the very nature that was brought upon us by Adam. That nature is what binds us. That nature is what holds us. The fact that we have been totally sold under sin. The fact that sin essentially possesses us and makes it impossible for us to ever truly please God. But then, in spite of that, if you look at Romans, the 5th chapter, 8th verse, it says that, but God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So in other words, while we were yet still sold under sin, while we did not yet belong to God, but still were sold under sin, Christ came and died for us to purchase us. This blood price that had to be spent in order to purchase our freedom. He spent it when we were actively in rebellion against God. And that's actually truly amazing, because I have to try to wrap my mind around the fact that who would even bother you or bother themselves to go out of their way to help someone who hated them? You know what I mean? Especially in this day and age, who does that? It's a struggle to even comprehend who would do that, because we spend so much time nowadays just bashing each other. You have family members who fall out with each other because one person doesn't do what another person wants them to do, or one person falls out with someone else because they won't do what that person approves or disapproves of. As a result, you have rifts that form within families. We're talking about families, the people you love unconditionally just because you share the same bloodline. These are supposed to be the ties that bind and can't be broken, and yet you have people who will fall out with each other publicly and can't be reconnected because of a difference in opinion on sometimes simple stuff. It amazes me. And yet here we have Christ, who we're supposed to be like, by the way. This is who we're supposed to be trying to be like. A lot of times you hear about Christians who fall out with others because they won't be like them, and yet here you have Christ who is saying, I want you to be like me. I loved you when you didn't love me. Terrifying. Check this out. If you look at John the 8th chapter, the 34th verse, it says, Jesus responded. This was a question that came from the Pharisees and Sadducees who were trying to tie him up. But he responded to them. He said, I assure you, everyone who commits a sin is a slave of sin. A slave does not remain in the household forever, but a son does remain forever. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, you really will be free. So now here we have the other side of this issue. Romans said that you've been totally sold under sin and you can't please God, period. And then you have Romans 5:8 that said that, okay, well, back when you were completely sold under sin, back when you were completely unlovable, when you had no access to God, Christ died for you anyway. And then Jesus responding to questions from people who were trying to trip him up and tie him up, he assures people that everyone who commits sin, every last one of us, is a slave of sin. So we're bound by sin just because we commit sin. But if the Son sets us free, then we're free. Because you have to understand that a slave can't free themselves, but a son of the household, oh, he can. And if he frees you, oh, you're free completely. But in order for the Son to have freed us, blood had to be shed. And when was it shed? It was shed on a cross on Calvary. When Jesus hung, bled, and died. To say that, it sounds so clinical because it seems as if it was something that was just done and it was so quick. But you have to be aware that Jesus hung on that cross for hours, where he slowly asphyxiated while having nails driven through his arms and his feet into a rough-hewn cross, while sitting under the hot sun, and in such a way that his lungs could not fully expand even when he tried to take a breath. After having been beaten so badly that his flesh, his body had been torn into ribbons. The whip had torn him so badly that his flesh and muscles were torn away from his bones. After having endured all of that, he was forced to hang on this cross and die by asphyxiation. That's a horrible way to go. But he endured all of this, hours of this. He endured not for anything that he had done, but for sins that we commit, sins that we were born into, and sins that we commit. All of that for us, even when we live in such a way that shows pretty much contempt for him. That is the cost of our freedom. And it might seem like such a small thing when you look at the numbers that I listed off at the beginning of this podcast. The numbers of young men who died in various conflicts in the history of this nation. But you have to understand the scale that we're talking about. That list of numbers, those young men died to try to preserve the freedom of one nation. But Christ died to ensure that the entire world, every person born in this world, would have access to salvation, even when many of us would refuse to take advantage of it. We would still have access. That is truly amazing. And at the same time, I find myself ashamed of the quote-unquote Christians that take advantage by attempting to stand in judgment of others' small infractions. or even sometimes large infractions, what we might deem to be large infractions, but attempt to stand in Jesus' position and cast judgment on each other as if we have grounds to stand in judgment. I know I don't. I'm still just me. I'm still trying to get in. I'm still striving to make it into heaven. And knowing that if I do make it in, it will seriously be just by the skin of my teeth. Because I'm not perfect, nor will I ever claim to be. All I can do is my best, knowing that if God doesn't give me grace, my best will never be enough. I'm so grateful that Jesus paid the cost for freedom, for my freedom, for yours. I'm so glad. I just pray that gratefulness that I have, that you have, will translate into recognition. That gratefulness will translate into true recognition for all that God has done in our lives up to this point and beyond. Because I'll be honest, we got a lot to be thankful for. If we don't express our gratefulness, the Bible says that the rocks will cry out on our behalf. And I don't need no rocks shouting on my behalf. I can say thank you perfectly well on my own. So, look, Blueprint Faithful, honor the cost of the freedom that God has given you. Be thankful for the fact that Christ has purchased your freedom through his blood, his suffering. And be willing to express that. Don't be ashamed of it. Because he wasn't too ashamed to pay the cost. So don't be ashamed to show that you're grateful. Imagine if he was ashamed to pay the price. Where would we be? Where would we be?
Hey there, fellow listeners. As we wind down another inspiring episode of Blueprint for Life, we want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can always find more uplifting content and past episodes on our website, blueprintforlifepodcast.com, or you can find us on Amazon Music, Audible, or Spotify. Join us next time for more faith-filled conversations and stories that fuel your spirit. Until then, stay blessed and keep shining your light.